My name is Zoe, and I just turned 27 last month. I thought getting older meant earning respect, especially from my own family. But apparently, it just means becoming an open wallet. I never imagined my parents would ambush me at our family reunion demanding money in front of everyone. The look on my grandmother's face when my father announced I should share my good fortune will haunt me forever. My hands were shaking, my face burning with humiliation, and something inside me finally snapped. Before I tell you how this family disaster unfolded, let me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe and like this video if you've ever had to stand up to family pressure about your finances. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I always thought my family was pretty normal. We lived in a modest two-story house in a middle-class neighborhood, had two family vacations a year, and celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes. My dad, James, worked as an insurance agent, while my mom, Diana, taught third grade at the local elementary school. We never seemed rich, but we never struggled either. At least that was how it appeared on the surface. Behind closed doors, money was always a complicated topic in our household. My parents had completely different approaches to finances. Dad was extremely frugal, saving every receipt, questioning every purchase, and constantly talking about retirement planning. Mom, on the other hand, was what you might call a spontaneous spender. She believed in living in the moment and would often come home with shopping bags full of things we didn't necessarily need. Their arguments about money were frequent but quiet, usually happening late at night when they thought we kids were asleep. There was one financial belief they completely agreed on, though. Both firmly believed that once children started working, they should help support their parents financially. This wasn't a casual expectation. It was practically a family doctrine. They would often remind us that in many cultures, children take care of their aging parents, and that this was simply the right thing to do. Never mind that they were only in their 50s and nowhere near retirement age. When you start making good money, you'll help out the family, right, Zoe? Mom would ask, even when I was just a teenager. It wasn't really a question. I'm the middle child between my older brother Tyler and younger sister Megan. Tyler, 31 and working as an engineer, has always been the golden child who never rocked the boat. He nodded along with whatever our parents said and presumably fulfilled their financial expectations, though I later learned things weren't exactly as they seemed with him either. Megan, at 22, is still in college studying business and remains our parents' absolute favorite. They pay for her apartment, her car, and most of her expenses, even though they claim to be struggling financially. My own financial journey has been anything but smooth. After graduating with a degree in graphic design, I spent nearly 2 years bouncing between unpaid internships and minimum wage coffee shop jobs. My parents constantly reminded me that I had chosen a impractical field and should have studied something more lucrative. They offered minimal support during this time, suggesting I move back home, but with conditions that would have made independent work nearly impossible. When I finally landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm, I was making just enough to share an apartment with 2 roommates and eat something other than ramen noodles a few times a week. My student loan payments took nearly a third of my income, and I had to budget meticulously for everything else. I created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every single expense. Monday through Thursday was strict budget mode with home-cooked meals and no unnecessary spending. I allowed myself small indulgences on weekends, usually just a movie or dinner with friends. Every extra dollar went toward building an emergency fund, paying extra on my student loans, and saving for eventually getting my own apartment without roommates. Financial experts recommend having 6 months of expenses saved, and I was determined to reach that goal despite my limited income. The hints about financial support started small. Dad would call mentioning their water heater needed replacing, sighing deeply about the unexpected expense. Mom would text about how property taxes had gone up again this year, followed by a pointed, "It's so expensive to maintain the house you kids grew up in." At family gatherings, they would casually drop comments about friends whose children helped out with the bills or bought them a new refrigerator. I usually responded with sympathy but no offers of money. This wasn't out of selfishness, I simply had nothing to spare. The entry-level graphic design world paid barely above minimum wage, and after rent, student loans, and basic necessities, my savings grew at a painfully slow rate. Some months, an unexpected expense like a doctor visit or car repair would wipe out what little I had managed to save. Everything changed 3 months ago when I received a promotion to junior art director. The salary increase wasn't enormous, but it meant I could finally breathe a little easier each month. I celebrated by paying off my smallest student loan completely and treating myself to a new professional wardrobe from a secondhand store. I was proud of my accomplishment and posted about my promotion on social media, thanking my team for the opportunity. That post was my first mistake. Within hours, my phone lit up with congratulatory messages, including ones from my parents. Dad's text seemed innocuous enough. "Proud of you, kiddo. Looks like things are finally turning around." Mom's was more direct. "Wonderful news. Now you'll be able to help out a bit. Call me." I didn't call right away. Something in my stomach tightened at the immediacy of her request. I was still adjusting to the idea of not living paycheck to paycheck, of actually having a small financial cushion. The promotion came with more responsibilities and longer hours. I had earned this through countless late nights, weekend work, and constantly improving my skills through online courses I paid for myself. The following week, the calls from my parents increased. They wanted to know exactly how much more I was making, whether I had considered moving to a less expensive apartment now that I could afford to help family, and if I had remembered that they had sacrificed so much for my education. The fact that I had taken out student loans to cover most of my education and was still paying them off didn't seem relevant to them. Nor did they acknowledge that they had contributed more toward my siblings' educations than mine. Tyler had received a partial scholarship, and they had covered the rest. Megan was currently attending a private university with their full financial support. I tried setting boundaries by explaining that I was still establishing myself financially and focusing on reducing my debt. "That's exactly why you should move back home," Mom suggested. "You could save on rent and help us with the mortgage instead. It's a win-win." Except it wouldn't be. Moving back would mean a 90-minute commute each way, following their household rules at 27, and inevitably becoming an on-demand cash source. My independence, which I had worked so hard to establish, would evaporate. The tension built over weeks with increasingly guilt-laden messages and calls. I began dreading my phone notifications. When the invitation to our annual family reunion at Grandmother's Lake House arrived, I almost declined. But family is family, and I had missed seeing my extended relatives. I budgeted carefully to bring thoughtful gifts and food contributions, determined to do my part without compromising my financial stability. I had no idea I was walking into a carefully orchestrated financial ambush. The annual Benson family reunion at my grandmother's lake house has been a tradition since before I was born. Every summer, relatives from across the country converge on the charming property that has been in our family for 3 generations. The sprawling yard with ancient oak trees, the wooden dock stretching into the crystal-clear lake, the screened porch where the adults sip cocktails while watching children play, it's all like something from a nostalgic movie about American family life. This year, I arrived with mixed emotions. I was genuinely excited to share my professional progress with my extended family, many of whom had encouraged my creative pursuits over the years. My Aunt Sophia, Dad's sister, had always been particularly supportive, sending me design books and articles about successful women in creative fields. My Uncle Jack, Mom's brother, had actually connected me with a colleague who gave me valuable portfolio feedback when I was just starting out. I had carefully planned my contributions to the gathering. Despite my still tight budget, I brought a gorgeous fruit platter arranged in a color gradient that showcased both my design skills and thoughtfulness. I had also created personalized bookmarks for each family member, featuring hand-drawn elements that represented their interests and personalities. These gifts had taken time rather than money, but I was proud of the personal touch. The lake house was already buzzing with activity when I arrived Friday evening. Children raced across the lawn, the grill was firing up for dinner, and the familiar sound of my uncle's booming laugh echoed from the porch. For a moment, I relaxed into the familiar comfort of family. My grandmother, Marion, 82 and still sharp as a tack, enveloped me in a warm hug that smelled of her signature rose perfume. "There's my artistic girl," she said, holding me at arm's length to examine me. "You're looking well, Zoe. Success agrees with you." I smiled, genuinely pleased by her observation. "Thanks, Grandma. It's been a good few months." "I've been following your work on that Instagram," she said, proudly pronouncing the app's name with careful precision that made me smile. The campaigns you've been designing are very impressive. Before I could respond, my cousin Rachel appeared, cocktail in hand. At 34, Rachel was the family rebel turned success story, having walked away from a corporate law career to start a thriving boutique bakery business. She was one of the few relatives who truly understood the courage it took to pursue a creative path. "The prodigal designer arrives," she said, handing me a drink. "Congratulations on the promotion. Junior art director is a big deal." We settled into comfortable conversation about work city life and her latest experimental pastry creations. As we talked, I noticed my parents across the lawn deep in conversation with my Uncle Robert, the wealthiest member of our extended family. They kept glancing my way, which sent a small warning signal through me. "Your parents have been talking about you since they arrived," Rachel said quietly, following my gaze. "Something about your new job and finances. Just wanted to give you a heads up." My stomach tightened. "Thanks for the warning. They've been hinting about needing financial help since my promotion." Rachel frowned. "That's interesting considering your dad was showing everyone pictures of their new boat this morning." New boat? This was the first I'd heard of any boat. "They told me last week they were struggling to pay their property taxes." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Well, the boat looks pretty new to me. And your mom mentioned something about a timeshare presentation they attended." The pieces were starting to come together, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Throughout the evening, I caught snippets of conversations that made my anxiety grow. Aunt Linda asking Mom if Zoe had agreed to help with the house repairs. Uncle Robert mentioning to Dad something about relying on the kids financially is risky business. My sister Megan avoiding my eyes whenever I came near her. When my brother Tyler arrived late that night, I pulled him aside on the porch, the soft chirping of cicadas providing cover for our conversation. "Do you know what's going on with Mom and Dad?" I asked without preamble. "They're acting weird and everyone keeps making comments about my finances." Tyler looked uncomfortable, running a hand through his short brown hair. "Look, Zoe, just be prepared. Okay? They've got this idea now that you're doing well." "But I'm barely doing well," I protested. "The promotion is great, but I'm still paying off massive student loans, trying to build savings and working crazy hours to prove myself." "I know that, but they—" He trailed off as our father approached. "There are my two oldest," Dad exclaimed with unusual joviality. "We need to finish setting up for tomorrow's big dinner. Your mother has it all planned out." The way he emphasized "planned out" sent another wave of unease through me. As the evening progressed, more relatives arrived and the house filled with the comfortable chaos of family. Under normal circumstances, I would have enjoyed every minute of it, but with each passing hour, my anxiety grew. That night, I tossed and turned in the small guest bedroom I was sharing with my cousin Sarah's teenage daughters. My mind raced with calculations and worst-case scenarios. I had only recently started feeling financially secure. My emergency fund covered just 2 months of expenses, not the 6 I was aiming for. My student loans still loomed large. The thought of derailing my carefully constructed budget made my chest tight. Saturday morning brought perfect weather, sunshine filtering through the trees and a light breeze coming off the lake. The day was filled with traditional family activities, swimming, the annual amateur fishing competition, board games on the porch. I tried to lose myself in these simple pleasures, but the undercurrent of tension remained. Grandma noticed something was off during our afternoon cookie baking session in her spacious country kitchen. "You seem distant today, Zoe," she observed while showing my young cousins how to properly cream butter and sugar. "Anything on your mind?" I hesitated, not wanting to bring family drama into her peaceful kitchen. "Just work stuff, Grandma." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me for a second. "Your father was telling me about your promotion. Said you're making, quote, real money now, unquote." The way she emphasized the phrase made it clear what she thought of such terminology. "It's a good step up," I acknowledged carefully. "But creative fields build slowly. I'm not exactly rolling in cash." Was all she said, but her expression was thoughtful as she returned to the cookies. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed increasingly obvious coordination between my parents. They spoke in hushed tones with various family members, who would then look at me with expressions ranging from sympathy to expectation. My sister Megan flitted about helping Mom with dinner preparations, casting nervous glances my way but avoiding direct conversation. By the time we all gathered for the big family dinner on the screened porch that evening, the atmosphere felt charged with unspoken tension. 3 generations of Bensons sat around the enormous wooden table that had hosted family meals for decades. Platters of grilled meats, fresh salads, and summer vegetables passed from hand to hand as conversations ebbed and flowed. I sat between my cousin Rachel and my teenage cousin Emma, trying to focus on their talk about college plans rather than the weighted glances coming from my parents' side of the table. My father stood to offer the traditional family dinner toast, champagne flute in hand, and I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. "To family," he began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet porch. "The one constant we can always count on through life's ups and downs." Everyone raised their glasses in agreement. I took a sip of champagne, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. "Family means supporting each other," Dad continued, his eyes moving deliberately around the table before settling on me. "Through good times and bad. When one of us succeeds, we all celebrate. And when that success allows us to help those who raised us and supported us, well, that's the natural order of things, isn't it?" The silence that followed felt oppressive. I stared down at my plate, feeling the weight of 24 pairs of eyes. "Which brings me to some news," Dad continued cheerfully, as though he wasn't orchestrating my public humiliation. "As many of you know, our Zoe recently received a well-deserved promotion at her design firm. We're so proud of her finally finding her financial footing." The emphasis on "finally" wasn't subtle. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "And," my mother chimed in, picking up seamlessly where Dad left off, "she's generously agreed to help us with some much-needed house repairs. That old place has been showing its age, and with the quotes coming in around $5,000, we were worried until our successful daughter stepped up." My fork clattered against my plate. I had agreed to no such thing. Looking around the table, I saw a mix of reactions. Some relatives nodded approvingly. Others looked confused. My brother Tyler stared intently at his plate. Megan bit her lip nervously. I don't," I began, but my voice seemed to have deserted me. "We were just telling your Uncle Robert how you're helping out with the monthly bills, too," Mom continued brightly. "Such a responsible daughter we've raised." The room seemed to tilt slightly. They weren't just asking for a one-time home repair contribution. They were publicly announcing an ongoing financial commitment I'd never agreed to, effectively trapping me through social pressure. Across the table, I caught my grandmother's sharp gaze. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that gave me strength. She had raised 3 children as a single mother after my grandfather died young. She knew something about financial struggles and independence. The awkward silence was finally broken by my aunt trying to change the subject, asking about my cousin's upcoming wedding. But Mom quickly redirected. "Speaking of special occasions, we were thinking of having the roof fixed before the holidays when everyone comes over. Zoe, you mentioned you could help with that soon, right, sweetheart?" Every eye at the table turned to me. The moment of truth had arrived, and with it an unexpected clarity. This wasn't just about money. It was about boundaries, respect, and the future of my relationship with my family. How I responded in the next few seconds would set a precedent for years to come. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence around the table felt like it lasted an eternity. The gentle clinking of ice in water glasses and distant chirping of birds only emphasized how everyone had stopped eating to watch this family drama unfold. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and something else. Something that felt surprisingly like anger. "Mom, Dad," I finally managed, my voice quieter than I intended. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Could we discuss this after dinner?" I was trying to be diplomatic to save face for all of us, but my father wasn't having it. "There's nothing to discuss privately," he said with a dismissive wave. "We're family here, After all we've done for you, putting you through college, supporting your career choice, even when it seemed impractical, this is just what families do for each other." My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "Unless you don't think family is a priority," she added, her voice taking on that familiar guilt-inducing tone she'd perfected over the years. "If you really loved us, this wouldn't even be a question." Those words hit me like a physical blow. If you really loved us, as if love could only be measured in dollars and cents. "We're not asking for anything unreasonable," Dad continued, warming to his theme now that he'd started. "5,000 for the immediate repairs, and maybe just 1,000 or so monthly to help with the mortgage and bills. You don't need all that money for yourself living in that tiny apartment with roommates." I felt like I was in some surreal nightmare. They weren't just asking for a one-time emergency contribution. They were laying claim to my future earnings publicly without any prior discussion. Around the table, family members began taking sides, some with words, others with expressions. Uncle Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. "James, Diana, perhaps this isn't the best venue for financial planning." "Nonsense," my mother replied. "Zoe should be proud to help her family. Tyler understands family responsibility, don't you, Tyler?" My brother looked up, his expression unreadable. He opened his mouth to speak but said nothing, dropping his gaze back to his plate. His silence felt like both a betrayal and a confirmation something was very wrong here. Aunt Sophie, always the peacemaker, tried changing the subject again. "The garden looks beautiful this year, Marion. Those hydrangeas are spectacular." But Mom interrupted again. "Of course, if Zoe moved back home like we suggested, she could save on rent and help with the mortgage instead. It makes perfect financial sense." Suddenly, a flash memory hit me of the nights I'd spent in my first apartment after college. I'd been so broke that I had to choose between electricity and food some weeks. I'd eaten ramen noodles for 21 days straight, once carefully rationing each package to last longer. I'd picked up graphic design freelance work on weekends and evenings, building my portfolio while working full-time at a coffee shop that barely paid minimum wage. Some nights, I'd cried myself to sleep from the stress and exhaustion. Where had my parents been then? They'd offered minimal support, mostly in the form of criticism about my career choice and suggestions that I study something practical instead. They had not offered financial help when I was truly struggling. In fact, they'd made it clear that as an adult, my finances were my responsibility. "You said you bought a timeshare," I said suddenly, the words escaping before I could stop them. The table went completely silent. "And a boat," I continued, my voice stronger now. "Rachel mentioned Dad was showing pictures of your new boat this morning." My father's face reddened. "That's completely different. We got an excellent deal on that timeshare, and the boat is just a small fishing boat, nothing fancy." "But you told me last month you couldn't afford your property taxes," I said, pieces clicking into place. "You said you might have to take out a loan to cover basic expenses." My mother shot my father an irritated look. "We have different accounts for different expenses," she said dismissively. "The house repairs are unexpected costs." From across the table, my grandmother spoke up for the first time. "Diana," she said in that no-nonsense tone that could still make my mother straighten her posture, "did you actually discuss any of this with Zoe before tonight?" Mom had the grace to look slightly abashed. "We mentioned she should help out now that she's doing well. She knows our expectations." "And what about Tyler?" Grandma continued, turning to my brother. "You said he understands family responsibility. Is he contributing $1,000 monthly too?" Tyler looked up, surprise crossing his features. My father jumped in quickly. "Tyler has his own expenses. His situation is different." "Different how?" I asked, finding my courage growing. "He makes more than I do as an engineer. Has been for years." The uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything. They'd never asked Tyler for ongoing financial support, just me. And they'd ambushed me publicly to make it impossible to refuse. "Is this why you've been avoiding me?" I asked my brother directly. Tyler finally spoke. "They've been talking about this since your promotion," he admitted. "I told them they should talk to you privately first, but—" He trailed off, shrugging helplessly. The final straw came when my mother leaned forward, patting my hand condescendingly. "Zoe has always been somewhat selfish with her resources," she told the table as if I wasn't sitting right there. Even as a child, she struggled with sharing. We're just trying to help her grow past that. Something broke inside me in that moment, the last thread of patience perhaps, or the final barrier holding back years of financial anxiety and familial guilt. The trembling in my hands stopped. My vision seemed to clear. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt absolutely certain about where I stood. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "I need everyone to listen carefully," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. My hands were no longer shaking, and though my heart pounded in my chest, my mind felt remarkably clear. Since my parents have decided to make my financial situation a family discussion, let's have complete transparency. I took a deep breath, scanning the faces around the table. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, and my parents' expressions wavered between shock and indignation that I would challenge them publicly. I graduated with $48,000 in student loans. I began the numbers I reviewed monthly, now seared into my memory. I currently pay $630 every month toward that debt. That's more than half my rent. My father started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. For once, he actually stopped. My entry-level position paid just above minimum wage until 3 months ago. Most of you don't know this, but there were weeks I had to choose between buying groceries or keeping my electricity on. I never asked my parents for help during that time because they made it clear my career choice meant financial independence. I looked directly at my mother. The promotion you're now viewing as your personal windfall increased my salary by $12,000 annually. After taxes, that's about $800 more per month. The table was completely silent now. Even the children were listening. From that increase, I'm putting $200 extra toward my student loans to reduce the principal faster. $300 goes to my emergency fund because financial experts recommend having 6 months of expenses saved. The rest covers the rising cost of rent, groceries, and healthcare. I pulled out my phone, opening my budgeting app. I can show anyone who's interested exactly where every dollar goes. I track it meticulously because I have to. I have no hidden accounts, no luxury spending, and virtually no discretionary income. My mother's expression had shifted from indignation to embarrassment, but I wasn't finished. "What I find interesting," I continued, "is that while I'm budgeting down to the last dollar and working 50-hour weeks to advance my career, you've purchased a boat and a timeshare, but claim you need my financial help for essential repairs." "Now wait just a minute." My father began, his face flushing red. "Those were investments. And my career is my investment," I countered firmly. "One that I've built entirely on my own. One that requires continued education, portfolio development, and networking to grow." I turned to face the entire table. I love my family deeply. If there were a genuine emergency, I would do whatever I could to help. But I'm not an ATM. I'm your daughter, your niece, your granddaughter, your cousin. I deserve the same respect you'd give any other adult at this table. Uncle Jack, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "She's right, Diana. If you needed financial help, you should have talked to Zoe privately, not ambushed her at a family dinner." "It's not an ambush to expect family support," my mother protested, but her voice had lost its conviction. My grandmother set her fork down with a decisive click. "When your father died and left me with 3 children," she said, looking directly at my mother, "I never once demanded financial help from any of you once you started working. I encouraged your independence because that's what parents are supposed to do, prepare their children to stand on their own 2 feet. She turned to me, her eyes warm with pride. "Zoe has worked incredibly hard to build her career in a challenging field. If she's finally reaching a point of financial stability, that's something to celebrate and encourage, not treat as an opportunity to redirect her resources." My mother pushed her chair back abruptly, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't believe you're all turning against us for asking for a little help, after everything we've sacrificed." She threw her napkin on the table and stormed into the house. My father gave me a long, disappointed look before standing to follow her. "We'll discuss this later," he said in a low voice as he passed me, "when you're thinking more clearly about your obligations." As they disappeared into the house, A heavy silence settled over the table. I remained standing for a moment, feeling oddly weightless despite the confrontation. Then my legs began to tremble from the adrenaline crash, and I sank back into my chair. Across the table, my cousin Rachel caught my eye and gave me a subtle thumbs up. Beside me, I felt a gentle squeeze on my hand. Looking down, I realized Emma, my teenage cousin, had reached over to grasp my fingers in solidarity. The simple gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Well?" Uncle Robert said after a moment, reaching for the bowl of mashed potatoes. "I think we could all use some more food. Zoe, would you like some potatoes?" The mundane question after such an emotional confrontation was so absurd that I couldn't help but laugh a little. "Yes, please." I managed accepting the bowl with still trembling hands. Conversation gradually resumed around the table, carefully steering toward neutral topics like my cousin's upcoming wedding and Uncle Jack's new woodworking hobby. I participated minimally, still processing what had just happened. When dinner finally ended, I helped clear the dishes in silence, grateful for the simple, mindless task. My brother Tyler approached me in the kitchen, his expression apologetic. "I should have warned you," he said quietly, taking a stack of plates from my hands. "They've been planning this for weeks." "Why didn't they ever ask you for money?" I questioned, keeping my voice low. "You make more than I do." Tyler looked around to make sure we weren't overheard. "They did about 5 years ago when I got my first big promotion. I gave them some money for a few months, but it was never enough. The requests kept getting bigger, and when I finally said no, there was a huge blowout." I stared at him in surprise. "You never told me." "They swore me to secrecy," he admitted, looking ashamed. "Said they didn't want to burden you and Megan with family problems. I think they were just embarrassed that I refused. So they moved on to the next target." I concluded, the pieces fitting together. "Me." Tyler nodded grimly. "They're not bad people, Zoe. They're just terrible with money and too proud to admit it. Dad has always needed to maintain appearances, and Mom can't say no to anything she wants." I leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. "What happens now?" "Based on experience, they'll ignore you for about a week, then start with guilt trips via Megan," he predicted. "Eventually, they'll either accept your boundaries or—" He trailed off. "Or what? Or they'll double down and things will get worse before they get better," he finished honestly. Looking at my brother's face, I realized he carried his own weight of family financial expectations silently bearing it all these years. In that moment, despite the tension still filling the house, I felt strangely validated. I wasn't crazy for wanting financial independence. I wasn't selfish for protecting my future. And most importantly, I wasn't alone. Outside the kitchen window, the sun was setting over the lake, painting the water with streaks of gold and orange. Tomorrow I would have to face the aftermath of tonight's confrontation. But in this moment, despite the discomfort and uncertainty, I felt something unexpected relief. The secret expectations had finally been brought to light, and I had found my voice. As difficult as it was, that was progress worth celebrating. I left the family reunion early the next morning, packing my bags before most people were awake. My grandmother caught me as I was loading my car, still in her bathrobe with a steaming mug of coffee in hand. "Running away?" she asked, though her tone wasn't accusatory. "I think it's best if I give Mom and Dad some space," I replied, shutting my trunk. "Last night was intense." She nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "You know, your grandfather and I had a similar situation with my in-laws when we were first married. They expected us to contribute to their retirement despite their frequent cruises and new cars." I leaned against my car, curious. "What did you do?" "We set boundaries," she said simply. "It wasn't easy, and they didn't speak to us for nearly 6 months. But eventually they came around when they realized our relationship was worth more than money." She reached out and squeezed my arm. "Standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish, Zoe. It makes you an adult." "I'm proud of you." Her approval meant more than I could express. I hugged her tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of rose perfume before getting in my car for the long drive home. The week that followed was eerily quiet. No calls or texts from my parents, which was unusual even during normal times. My sister Megan sent a brief message asking why I had upset everyone. But when I tried explaining my perspective, she stopped responding. Tyler, on the other hand, checked in daily. We began having conversations we'd avoided for years, discussing the financial expectations and emotional manipulation that had shaped our relationships with our parents. For the first time, I felt truly connected to my brother as an adult, sharing our similar struggles rather than just childhood memories. 10 days after the reunion, my grandmother called. "Your mother is telling everyone you've abandoned the family," she informed me without preamble. "I thought you should know." I sighed, staring out my apartment window at the city skyline. "I'm not surprised." "She'll settle down eventually," Grandma assured me. In the meantime, I suggested she talk to a financial advisor about their spending habits. She didn't appreciate the advice. I smiled, despite the situation. My grandmother had never been one to mince words. "Thanks for standing up for me at dinner," I told her. "It meant a lot." "I'm just sorry it came to that," she replied. "Family finances should be discussed privately and honestly, not sprung on someone in public." After we hung up, I spent the evening researching financial boundaries and family dynamics. What I found was both enlightening and validating. Financial abuse and manipulation within families was surprisingly common, and many people struggled to establish healthy boundaries around money with parents. Armed with this knowledge and a growing sense of confidence in my position, I reached out to my own financial advisor, Angela. We had met through a free workshop at the local library when I was first struggling to manage my student loans. Though I could barely afford her services then, she had given me invaluable guidance that helped shape my financial habits. "What you're describing isn't unusual," Angela told me during our appointment. "Parents sometimes feel entitled to their children's resources without recognizing how economic conditions have changed since they were young." Together, we crafted a clear plan for how I could respond to future financial requests. We outlined exactly what constituted a true emergency. I would help with medical crises, imminent foreclosure, versus lifestyle choices. I would not fund timeshares, boats, regular bills they could afford with proper budgeting. The key, Angela emphasized, is consistency and clarity. No means no, maybe means yes to pushy people. You need to be absolutely clear about your boundaries. With her help, I drafted an email to my parents. It was respectful but firm, explaining my financial situation in detail, including my debt savings goals and budget constraints. I acknowledged their support over the years, while clarifying that my career was still developing, and I simply didn't have the resources they seemed to think I did. I offered alternative ways I could help, like researching more affordable home repairs or helping them create their own budget, but made it clear that regular financial contributions weren't possible at this stage of my life. I read the email over a dozen times before finally sending it, my finger hovering over the button with last-minute doubts. But ultimately, I knew this was a necessary step toward healthier family relationships. The response came 3 days later, not via email, but in an angry phone call from my father. "So, this is how you respond to your family?" he began without greeting. "With a formal email like 'we're business associates'?" I took a deep breath, remembering Angela's advice to remain calm and consistent. I thought writing would give you time to consider my perspective without emotions getting in the way. "This isn't about perspective," he argued. "It's about family loyalty. Your mother is heartbroken that you've chosen money over family." "That's not what's happening," I replied evenly. "I'm choosing financial responsibility and honest communication. I'd be happy to help you and Mom create a budget that works with your income." "We don't need budgeting help from our daughter," he scoffed. "We need respect and support." "Respect goes both ways, Dad, and support doesn't just mean money." The conversation continued in circles for nearly an hour, with my father alternating between guilt trips, accusations, and occasionally brief moments of what seemed like genuine listening. By the end, nothing was resolved, but I had maintained my boundaries without giving in to emotional manipulation. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. The following weekend, I suggested meeting my parents at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our homes. I thought a public setting might help keep emotions in check while we tried to find common ground. To my surprise, they agreed. The meeting began tensely. My mother barely made eye contact while my father launched immediately into a list of reasons why my position was selfish and hurtful. I listened patiently, reminding myself that decades of financial patterns wouldn't change in a single conversation. "I understand you're disappointed," I said when he finally paused, "but I need you to understand that I simply can't provide the financial support you're asking for without sacrificing my own security. When your father and I were your age," my mother began, her voice tight with disapproval, "we were already supporting a family and helping both our parents. The economic reality was different then," I pointed out gently. "Housing costs have increased dramatically compared to wages. My student loans alone are more than your entire college education cost." "Excuses," my father muttered. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder of printouts I had prepared. "These are statistics on millennial financial challenges compared to previous generations. These are my actual budget sheets showing where every dollar goes. And this," I said, placing a final document on the table, "is information about a family financial counselor who specializes in intergenerational money issues." My father started to push the papers away, but my mother surprisingly reached for them, her expression uncertain. "I'm not refusing to help because I don't care," I continued. "I'm setting boundaries because I need to secure my own future first. It's like the airplane oxygen mask principle: put on your own mask before helping others." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something like understanding in my mother's eyes. "Your grandmother said something similar," she admitted quietly. We talked for another hour, covering difficult topics like their spending habits, my financial goals, and how we could support each other in non-monetary ways. Nothing was fully resolved, but small cracks appeared in the wall of tension between us. My father remained largely resistant, but my mother showed signs of genuinely listening. As we prepared to leave, I made one final offer. "Instead of giving you money directly, I'd be willing to help research affordable contractors for the house repairs and look into whether your home insurance might cover some of the costs." It was a compromise that respected both my boundaries and their needs. My mother nodded slowly. "That would be helpful. Thank you." It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. As I drove home that evening, I felt a cautious optimism that we might eventually find a new normal one built on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. 6 months after that fateful family reunion, the autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold across Portland. My life had changed in ways both subtle and profound since I had stood up for my financial boundaries. The most obvious change was in my relationship with my parents. The first 2 months had been the hardest, with sporadic communication punctuated by emotional text messages and occasional heated phone calls. But slowly, a new pattern emerged. Instead of giving them cash as they'd initially demanded, I helped them create a realistic budget based on their actual income. The process was eye-opening for all of us. My parents had been living well beyond their means for years, using credit cards to bridge the gaps and creating a cycle of debt that explained their constant sense of financial pressure. "I had no idea we were spending that much on dining out," my mother admitted during one of our budget sessions at their kitchen table. The spreadsheet I'd created showed they were spending nearly $800 monthly at restaurants, an amount that shocked even them when they saw it in black and white. My father, always more resistant to change, gradually began to participate in these discussions. His defensive posture softened slightly when he realized I wasn't judging their habits, just helping them see the complete picture. "We never really tracked our spending," he confessed one evening. "Your grandfather believed budgets were for people who couldn't afford their lifestyle." "Everyone needs a budget," I replied gently. "Even billionaires have financial teams managing their money." Perhaps the most unexpected outcome was the strengthened relationship with my brother Tyler. Our shared experience of parental financial pressure created a bond that hadn't existed before. We began meeting monthly for dinner, sometimes just to catch up, other times to strategize about family dynamics. "They haven't asked me for money since the reunion," he told me over pizza one evening. "I think you breaking the pattern helped break the cycle for both of us." My younger sister Megan had been the slowest to come around. As the favorite and still financially dependent on our parents, she initially sided completely with them. But as her graduation approached and she began job hunting, our conversations shifted. Mom mentioned I should plan to help them with bills once I start working, she confided during a rare sister lunch. Is that normal? It was an opening I hadn't expected but welcomed wholeheartedly. I shared my experience without criticizing our parents, focusing instead on the importance of financial independence and clear boundaries. By the end of lunch, she was asking for budget templates and advice on student loan repayment strategies. My own financial situation had improved steadily over the months. Without the pressure of my parents' expectations, I was able to focus entirely on my career development and personal financial goals. I took on a few selective freelance projects that boosted both my portfolio and my income, allowing me to accelerate my debt repayment plan. The junior art director position continued to challenge and fulfill me professionally. My confidence in client meetings grew, and my designs began receiving recognition within the industry. A campaign I had designed for a local nonprofit even won a regional advertising award, adding a valuable credential to my resume. By making extra payments on my student loans, I had reduced the principal, significantly cutting years off my repayment timeline and saving thousands in interest. My emergency fund now covered 4 months of expenses, bringing me closer to the 6-month goal financial experts recommended. I had even started researching first-time homebuyer programs, a dream that had seemed impossibly distant just a year earlier. The true test of our new family dynamic came with Thanksgiving approaching. My parents had traditionally hosted the holiday, but this year my grandmother suggested a change. "I'd like to host at the lake house this year," she announced during a family call. "And I want everyone to bring something instead of having Diana do all the cooking." The shift was significant, reducing my parents' financial burden while maintaining the family tradition. To everyone's surprise, my mother seemed relieved rather than offended. "That sounds lovely, Mom," she agreed. "I'll bring my sweet potato casserole and cranberry relish." When Thanksgiving arrived, I drove to the lake house with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The last family gathering hadn't exactly gone smoothly, but as I helped set up the long table on the enclosed porch, now equipped with space heaters to combat the November chill, I felt a tentative optimism. My parents arrived bearing the promised dishes, plus a bottle of sparkling cider, rather than their usual expensive champagne, a small but telling sign of their budgeting efforts. My father greeted me with an awkward hug, still not entirely comfortable with our reconfigured relationship, but trying nonetheless. "The table looks beautiful," my mother commented, admiring the simple centerpiece of pine cones and autumn leaves I had arranged. "Very creative." Coming from her, this acknowledgement of my artistic sensibility felt like a significant olive branch. The dinner proceeded with surprisingly little tension. Conversation flowed naturally around topics that would have been landmines months earlier. When my cousin asked about my recent award, my father unexpectedly spoke up. "Zoe's campaign was featured in the regional business journal," he said, a hint of pride in his voice that I hadn't heard in years. "I've been showing it to clients at the insurance office." I nearly dropped my fork in surprise. Later, as dessert was being served, my mother clinked her glass for attention. "I'd like to say something," she announced, causing a momentary hush to fall over the table. My stomach tightened instinctively. "This past year has been challenging for our family," she began, glancing briefly at me. "James and I have had to reconsider some of our expectations and habits." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I want to thank Zoe for helping us create a budget that's actually working for us. We've paid off 2 credit cards already and have a plan for the rest." Her voice wavered slightly. "It turns out, our daughter is wiser about some things than we gave her credit for." The acknowledgement, public and heartfelt, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It wasn't a complete transformation. Our relationship still had complicated aspects, and old patterns didn't disappear overnight. But it was genuine progress, a recognition that respect and boundaries could ultimately strengthen rather than damage family bonds. My grandmother caught my eye from across the table, giving me a subtle wink of approval. She had weathered her own financial storms decades earlier and recognized the courage it took to change entrenched family dynamics. After dinner, we gathered in the living room for the traditional sharing of gratitudes. When my turn came, I spoke from the heart. "I'm grateful for difficult conversations that lead to greater understanding," I said simply. and for family that's strong enough to grow through challenges rather than being broken by them. My father sitting across from me met my eyes steadily for perhaps the first time since our confrontation. There was something new in his gaze, a grudging respect that hadn't been there before. We were finding our way to a new relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been tears, angry words, and periods of painful silence. The temptation to give in for the sake of peace had been strong at times, but by holding firm to my financial boundaries, I had ultimately given our family something more valuable than money authenticity. The moment I stopped seeing boundaries as selfish and started seeing them as necessary for everyone's respect and growth was when I truly became an adult. Financial independence isn't just about money. It's about writing your own story on your own terms. As we move forward, I know there will be more challenges. Old habits and expectations don't vanish overnight. But I face the future with a clearer understanding of my worth beyond my wallet and the confidence to protect the financial security I've worked so hard to build. What about you? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family about money or other resources? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for their financial health isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the hardest no leads to the healthiest relationships in the end.